Okay, we've got to begin with the commercial thing. This video is sponsored by Crackside Pets, purveyors of all of the lice, along with Kelbrook, crack lice, crab lice, strobe lice, police lice, basically all of the lice. Okay, is they can give you what you want. All of the lice, thug lice. Did I mention those? Chaff lice. Yeah. Okay, all the lies. So that's how this video begins. Go to Crackside Pets if you need any of those. Okay, we're going to talk about a bit of libel. Always a good idea. So everything I say in this video is allegedly. Okay, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. I don't even know who initiated it. I assume it was Amber Heard, and then Depp countersued. But it could be the other way around, really. I got a bit bored of it halfway through. I mean, I made up my mind long ago what happened here. Because of personal experience, I know that you're on the losing side when you're a man in any of these things. Because in today's woke world, basically, you're always in the right if you're a woman. You have, you're automatically the victim. And it's very hard to prove you're not. Basically, the playing field has to be elevated in your favour, so that everything's downhill for you. If you're a woman, we see this in any Netflix series. Who's the hero? I've just started watching Stranger Things. Who's the girl that can snap your arm with the power of her mind? Well, it's a girl. Well, I said it's a girl anyway, but yeah, you know what I mean. Feminist propaganda, all of it. They want all men to be emasculated simps. And they love it being in their favour, except when it comes to a thing like this, obviously then, of course, the woman is an innocent victim. And that's the reality of the world. And sadly, I've learned by bitter experience that's the case, that if a man were to take their daughter, certainly in the UK, not in, this is the Western world thing, this will not be the case in the Islamic world, for example, which has a much better moral code. But certainly in the UK, I assume in America, if a man would take their daughter, they'd be arrested for parental abduction. But a woman can steal a 3 or 4 year old child. And if you don't like it, well, tough. You're told get a solicitor when you phone the police. No parental abduction there. That's just a personal thing. But anyway, I thought I'd take you through history of libel. So, look, I'm more comfortable in the area of World War One in history, but I like a bit of poetry. I studied a few things. So the most famous libel case of the 19th century, late Victorian, about 1895, was the Marquis of Queensbury. He's the same one that codified boxing. Yeah, obviously boxing is an ancient sport. It was in the ancient Olympics, in Greece and stuff, in the Peloponnese. Olympia, not to be confused with Mount Olympus, by the way, that's up in the north of Greece. We don't know why that's Mount Olympus and then Olympia is in the south in the Peloponnese, but anyway, that's a digression. But ancient sport, but as the Victorians did, they codified all sorts of things, hence why, football is measured in yards, not in metres. Okay, the Germans say a penalty is an elf metre, but it's not, it's 12 yards. And we have a 6-yard box, etc. They codified a lot of things. The Marquis of Queensbury codified boxing. Squared off the circle, had a minute's rest between rounds. Got the expression up to scratch, because that's kind of the line you have to be on, when you're ready to box again. Beats and rhymes, he knows far more about that than I do, but hey, check out boxing, beats and rhymes. So the Marquis of Queensbury against Oscar Wilde. Now, Oscar Wilde was famous for being famous. He scored a double first at, I believe it was Oxford, might have been Cambridge, but I think it's one of the big universities. I think it was Oxford. Irish, of course. He would go out dressed as Prince Rupert from the Civil War and other kind of mad outfits that were already several hundred years old. The Civil War is the 1640s. And he was literally famous for being famous, like so many of the celebrities of today. They've not done a lot, but they're famous for being famous. Colleen Rooney against, Rebecca Vardy. They're not famous for their accomplishments, but they're famous for being famous. And Oscar Wilde was perhaps one of the first that was the case. Anyway, his son, Alfred Lord Douglas, was one of Oscar Wilde's lovers, and obviously he was homosexual. Oscar Wilde was, and I believe he did have a wife, possibly even kids. But much like Kelbrook, that was just a front, in my opinion. And yeah, so basically, Marcus Queensbury got wind of this affair, what was going on, and he obviously wasn't happy about it. He apparently was pretty tough, robust, brutish dude. And he was absolutely furious that his son was having a gay affair with Oscar Wilde. And so he went to one of the hotels in London that Oscar Wilde was staying at, one of the big hotels, and he left a note calling Oscar. He left it with the porter. Left a note calling Oscar Wilde a posing sodomite, and he even misspelled sodomite. I think it has two M's. He spelled it with one. Whatever. But either way, Oscar Wilde took umbrage to that. And the problem, because it started chatter, as you can imagine, around London. This suddenly kicks off everything, like in the Stereophonic song. It only takes one tree to make 1,000 matches. It only takes one match to burn 1,000 trees. And he started the forest fire with this. And suddenly all the chambermaids came out and said, yeah, we've seen lots of young men go into Oscar Wilde's room, and we found fecal stains on the bed sheets. And let's just not get into that. That's a bit gross. But anyway, that's what they said. And so it all kicked off. And it was actually Oscar Wilde that took that took the Marcus Queensbury to court for criminal libel, saying that he'd been defamed. Now, the problem with that was that there's one insurmountable defence, one perfect defence against libel, and that is if your allegations are actually true. And in this case, they were. And that was the problem. And Oscar Wilde's legal team said, initially, I guess we got a case potentially. I went to the Old Bailey, and within a few weeks, it was quite clear that Oscar Wilde's team, they were going to lose this case, mainly because Marcus Queensbury had hired high-powered lawyers, and they'd gone out and they found a bunch of rent boys around London that said, yeah, we were paid by Oscar Wilde to visit his room, got up to the X, Y, and Z with him, and yeah, so they're going to lose. Oscar Wilde has been portrayed as some kind of gay martyr. Obviously, The Picture of Dorian Gray wasn't a massive success. That was his novel. Wasn't a massive success back in the day, in the 19th century, but it's grown into this kind of very, very early example of gay, I don't know what the word is, but it's grown. It's grown over the years as the whole LGBTQXYZ thing has grown. Because obviously it's a man that falls in love with this portrait of the young dude that he's drawing, and that the portrait doesn't age, whereas he does, and that kind of thing. Well, whatever. He wasn't really a gay martyr, in the sense he had multiple opportunities to escape. In France, since 1789, storming the Bastille and the Revolution, homosexuality was legal in France. In the UK, it was still illegal. It remained so. Gross indecency between men was what it was called, up until the 1960s. So, but there was great reluctance to proceed with a trial like this. But it was Oscar Wilde that had started the trial, this criminal libel trial, and so the police had to act. However, they did tell Oscar Wilde, we'll be coming, 9 o'clock Thursday to arrest you, or whatever. They gave him multiple opportunities, actually, to flee to somewhere like France, where he could, do whatever he liked, and they wouldn't care. But he didn't. He kept pursuing the case, even though he was in the wrong. He hadn't been libelled. It was true, the allegation. And eventually, the police, because it had been so public, they had to be seen to act. And you can imagine the culture of the day, the repugnancy of what he'd been up to, clearly, they had to act. And so they did. And he was arrested. because it had been proved at trial, the trial he had begun, that what he was doing was indeed a criminal act at the time. And that's how, he went to one jail, then he went obviously famously to Reading Jail, and later he'd write The Ballad of Reading Jail, which is a brilliant poem, a little bit long, might do a analysis of it at some point, but and the thing that kind of, this in The Ballad of Reading Jail, the famous poem he wrote, it's you can tell about the bitterness when you read it, that during the trial, Alfred Lord Douglas, Bosie as he called him, or Boise, I don't know how he pronounced it, that's his nickname for the son of the Marquis of Queensbury, it seemed that he turned on him. Alfred Lord Douglas turned on him. And we should just say as well, one of the reasons why Oscar Wilde, went from being famous to being famous and started writing some brilliant literature, some amazing poetry. Read about his treatise on the demise of lying. It's absolutely hilarious. Brilliant. And also, obviously, the importance of being earnest is the most famous one. And the reason why he's writing all this stuff, he needed the money. He wasn't massively wealthy. He needed the money to pay for the flamboyant lifestyle that he wanted to lead with Alfred Lord Douglas. And so, even though this dude turned on him in the end, and, I guess he was berated by his dad. He's much younger than Oscar Wilde, about 17 years younger, I think. But yeah, so this was why that he was writing all this amazing works, because he needed the money. So we got Alfred Lord Douglas to thank for all the great literature Oscar Wilde wrote. Obviously, life was not easy for him, particularly in Reading Jail. I think he only spent a couple of years there. I believe the maximum sentence was 2 years of hard labour for gross acts of indecency between men. Oh, interesting, I should just say, that women weren't applied. Apparently women could have homosexual... is that the right word? Women could have sexual relationships between other women, and it was not a criminal offence. It was only gross indecency amongst men. So that was interesting. For all the alleged misogyny of the Victorian age and all this stuff, the law targeted only men. That's a fact. But anyway, he didn't live particularly long after. He went to France afterwards because obviously he could carry on what he was doing there. Didn't live many years. He died very young, I think about 43 or so. Yeah, and a great loss, of course. But anyway, so that was the famous libel trial of the 19th century. And that was when it was criminal libel. So it was a criminal offence if you're found guilty kind of either way. And, it a little different to today. The one that I've studied, actually, though, was about, certainly late 1999, 2000, this kind of period. And it was the Deborah Lipstadt case with Penguin Books on her side versus David Irving, the famous historian and Holocaust denier. And later, actually, he appears now to have retracted his Holocaust denial. Interesting, I might get into that in a bit. Either way, basically, Deborah Lipstadt wrote a book. She's American scholar, and she wrote a book, and she named David Irving as being a Holocaust denier and being somebody who regularly conversed and had dealings with other Holocaust denier organisations. In particular, I don't think she mentioned in the book, but it was the Institute for Historical Review, which is just a Holocaust denier organisation over in America. They took a load of pseudo history, a load of nonsense, really, in my opinion, having studied it. But anyway, and interestingly, Irving did not take a case over in America. He didn't take out a libel case and saying you've libelled me in America. Why was that? Well, in America you have, and this has bearing on the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case, you have the First Amendment protection. So you have a right to freedom of speech. However, that does have limits. You have a right to say what you want. However, if your words cause a great deal of damage to the other person in terms of financial gain or potential gain, that's a problem. Or if you accuse them of things like infidelity or having some loathsome disease, you got leprosy, that's a problem. You got an STD, that's a problem. You're not allowed to, so it has limits, this freedom of speech, the First Amendment rights. But in the US, even so, it's a little different to the UK. In the UK, all you have to do to win a libel case is to prove, let's say if you're the plaintiff, you're the one accusing the other person of libeling you, all you have to do is prove they're lying. You have to prove that what they said is untrue, and then you'll win your case. In America, it's not that simple because of the First Amendment rights. You have to prove not just they are lying, you have to prove, significant damage has been caused by what they've done. And this is why very often you see big libel cases taking place in London. Even if it's an international case, very often they happen in the UK because our libel law is simpler. And it's not criminal law. You don't have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. You just have to prove on the balance of evidence that most likely, this is the case. So the weight is not like criminal law. It's civil law. It's no longer criminal libel in the UK. It's civil law. So this is why we see this mushrooming of libel cases, because all you have to do is prove that what they said was untrue. And then you win. You don't have to prove great damage has resulted. So Irving waited after this book had been published on Holocaust denial by Deborah Lipstadt. By the way, if you want to watch a film about it, there's a film you can buy on YouTube. I don't know if it's on Prime or Netflix or whatever, but you can certainly buy it on YouTube, as I did. And Rachel Weisz plays Deborah Lipstadt, which is kind of funny because if you look at Deborah Lipstadt, she's this kind of like little tiny, not the nicest. I don't want to insult her, but she's not like the prettiest person in the world. She looks like this old, wizened prune of a scholar. That's really horrible. I don't want to insult her because she's an amazing lady, but she's not, not your Hollywood actress. And yet Rachel Weisz plays her in the film, and Rachel Weisz obviously is a very, very beautiful lady, in my opinion. Well, I don't think that's libelous to say that she's beautiful. But but she plays her, and it's a good film. But anyhow, so came over to the UK, as I say, late 90s, 2000 or so. And I have the book. It's called Telling Lies About Hitler, and it has big transcripts, basically a legal case. The amazing thing was actually that Penguin Books took it on, because it seems that up in the years before this happened, primarily Irving's income, David Irving, his income had not come so much from book selling. He'd been making most of income from libel trials, at least that's what the book said, because basically no one wanted to take him on, so they just settled, and we libeled you, we'll give you a few grand, give you 10 grand, give you 20, whatever. And he was settling out of court, and he'd won several this way. And it was remarkable that Penguin Books, because this book that Deborah Lipstadt published was not a bestseller, it was just a scholarly book, that a few interested people might read, but it wasn't a bestseller by any means, so it wasn't a great moneymaker. And yet Penguin Books said, no, we're going to defend you here. It could have been the Jewish influence. Obviously, Deborah Lipstadt is Jewish, and it's about the Holocaust, so maybe they felt they had to. I don't know the motivation, but I know that Lipstadt was very keen not for there to be any appearance of it being the Jews against Irving or anything like that, because she knows that, what people will think. So she was very keen that this is just a trial on the history. Am I telling the truth? Am I lying? Just a libel trial. And Irving, of course, would deliberately come to court by himself. He would tell all his mates, you stay back in public gallery, whatever. He wanted it to appear that it was him against the whole Jewish community. But equally well, Deborah Lipstadt was determined it wouldn't look like that either. So it's interesting the psychological games they played beforehand. But either way, so when Penguin Books decided to defend her, comes over to the UK, the libel trial, and it was history on trial. It's quite remarkable, really. So it was Professor Evans, who obviously is a famous World War II historian and done books about World War One, all this kind of stuff. and he was, and obviously Dr. Browning as well, who's another eminent scholar on the Holocaust specifically. And what they did is they literally went out, bought all of Irving's books, so they looked through them. And what they did was they asked the question, okay, we find errors here. Yeah, there's errors. But in any historical book, there's errors. I'm just listening to Anthony Beevor's book on Stalingrad. And I know from watching Tick History, he's highlighted several errors in that book. There's lots of errors, actually, in all of Beevor's books. But they're not skewed in one direction. This was the point when they bought all those books. They could see it wasn't random errors, random mistranslations of German documents. They were all facing in one direction, always to exculpate Hitler, always to minimise the Holocaust. So, for example, there was a German document about what was happening in the East and Hitler's sort of commands to the Einsatzgruppe and so on in the East. And he said, the actual German, he used the word Schrecken, which means terror. And he said it would be a good thing if the terror goes before us. And, that will drive away, the people that we don't want. Kind of, it's not a bad thing if terror pours out. It's almost like, if you look at the Assyrian army, when they attacked Israel, back in the days of Hezekiah, we have a document that was found in Sennacherib's palace saying, one of these cuneiform documents, tablets, I poured terror out across the land. And they did, because they used to flame people alive and stuff. And it was a little bit like this. Hitler's, this document that Irving had found in the archives, it's not a bad thing the terror goes before us. Irving had mistranslated that deliberately, because even I know the word Schrecken means terror. That's where we get Shrek from, the monster in the film. Well, he's not that monstrous, really, is he? But he mistranslated. He said it's not a bad thing if what we're doing, if what we're doing is thought to be bad. I can't remember the precise words, but he watered it down in a remarkable way. So it just sounded like, yeah, it's not a bad thing if people are afraid of us, kind of thing. But that wasn't what he said. Hitler was quite clear. We're pouring out terror over the land like Sennacherib. But anyway, and it was stuff like this. And also the key document was one on the bombing of Dresden, which obviously the 12th to the 13th of February 1945, where he kept claiming that he had a document from the chief medical examiner in Dresden saying that there had been something like 230,000 casualties. And he kept ramping it up until it was like 500,000 casualties. It's always crazy stuff. And they'd even found, because obviously you have discovery before, when you take someone to trial, you have a period of discovery. And you're allowed to, you have to see all of their documents. What have they got? What have you got? You let them both sides have to see what they've got. And of course, they went into Irving's archive, the researchers did, Browning and Evans and so on, and some of his postgrad students, and they found the document. And they also found a letter from the dude who'd actually prepared the document saying, I don't know why you're claiming that I was the chief medical examiner of Dresden. I wasn't. And so he was totally discrediting this document. And Irving had known this for years, so this document wasn't real. It was basically a Nazi propaganda piece. The real total, at least as far as they could count them, was about 23,000, which is still pretty bad. And then what they'd done, Goebbels had added a zero to it for the sake of propaganda, and then he put it out that this was the British terror flyers doing this Terrorfliegen, and they killed all these Germans. And there were other things, like they had copies of his speeches, for example. And this one I raised, actually, because it annoyed me. He did a speech, and I've actually seen the video of it. Irving did a speech saying, look at the town of Pforzheim, sort of town of central southern Germany. 10,000 people burned to death. We talk about the Holocaust. Well, these people were burned to death in one night. He kept saying they were burned to death. And I made the point, no, very few people were burned to death. You know that as well as I do. Because when we set are a mix of bombs, you'd obviously have a certain amount of high explosive to blow up the buildings, and then you'd have a certain amount of incendiaries. But what the people would do, obviously, as soon as the air raid sirens go, you went into your cellars. And they weren't burned to death, they were asphyxiated. Now, you still die, admittedly, and he inflated the total, it was far less than what he said, but it's just to add dramatic effect, he claimed they were burned to death. And I got loads of dumb remarks. Oh, human skin, it's so resilient to fire. And I'm like, no, that's not the point. The point is, when you have fires raging above a bomb shelter, it literally takes the oxygen out the air. That's how you can get a firestorm, and indeed there was one at Pforzheim. And so, why do you have to lie? Why can't you say, 3,000, 4,000 people, whatever, asphyxiated to death? It's still horrible. But he had to say they were burned to death, and he said it lots of times. So he was always skewing the totals up of people that died in the RAF campaign and the American 8th Air Force campaign against Germany, which admittedly did reach maybe 600,000 deaths. Although the Allied air crews, I think it was, if you add together the British and American, that wasn't far short of 100,000. So, it was a heavy death toll on both sides. And actually, if you compare it to the World War One blockade, where we embargoed not just things of military significance, strategic materials, we prevented food going to Germany. It probably caused more casualties, the blockade, because of people starving to death, particularly the vulnerable. So, you have to weigh that, in a war of national survival, which is what World War One and World War Two were. We were very close to, I won't go into all of it, but we were very, very close to making a deal with Hitler. It was only Churchill that didn't. If Halifax had prevailed or quit in those, dangerous months of mid-1940, if the government had fallen, we would have made a deal with Hitler. Probably Oswald Mosley would have been the new prime minister. It's scary to think what would have happened. It would be a very different Europe. It was touch and go. Somehow, Churchill talked Halifax into remaining in the government and fighting on. And we don't know how. It's one of those times you want to be a fly on the wall of history, because we know he took him for a little walk outside in the garden, and somehow he talked him into staying with the government, and the fact we had to fight Hitler, even if it meant, potentially losing everything, and even fighting on from the rest of the empire. So remarkable days. But anyway, war of national survival. Anyway, we're digressing for the point of libel. And of course, in that case, in the Lipstadt versus Irving case, the judge, having heard all the evidence, Irving's best argument was stuff like, Professor Evans is a rubbish speaker of German. He doesn't speak German as well as me, which is entirely true. Irving had worked in a steel mill in the Ruhr for several years. That's when he first started writing. He wrote The Destruction of Dresden. Obviously, he was a perfect fluent German speaker. Evans wasn't. Still could speak German, but not as fluently as Irving. But the point was that all the errors, mistranslations, misappropriated documents, misattributed documents, I should say, pointed in one direction, always to inflate the death toll, to try and see, and then, of course, in terms of those who had died in the Holocaust, to try and diminish those numbers and try and increase the numbers that had died in the Allied bombing campaign until they reached parity. So basically, much of a muchness, let's just call it quits kind of thing. Anyway, getting round to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing. Oh, we should say, so Irving lost the case. Penguin Books and Deborah Lipstadt won. Not sure if they ever got any payout from it because Irving was bankrupt. Not entirely sure about that. What I would say, though, it's interesting. He put out a YouTube video, it was a few years back now, where he talks about Operation Reinhardt, which was the most Belzich and Majdanek and Treblinka and places like this. And he basically admitted that, yeah, all these people were evacuated east and we never saw them again. And so they were killed. And I was amazed that, he actually had finally realised that they weren't just evacuated east to some sort of paradise, they were killed. That is why these people vanished. And the most important document in all of that was the Korher report, which was Himmler's chief statistician. And he'd very carefully compiled all of the numbers of Jews living in the whole of Europe that could potentially be reached by the Nazis, even ones in England. We know that there were 3 in the Channel Islands who were murdered with the complicity of the police there. So, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that, you can say we're holier than thou, but no, when we were occupied by the Germans, our police happily deported the Jews, all 3 of them. And all the other territories that potentially available, like Spain, obviously, not part of officially the, an Axis power, but potentially under the sway of the Nazis. All these places, they'd very carefully accounted how many Jews there were there, and he also listed how many had been sent east for, special treatment. And it's irrefutable, really, that this document is genuine, and it articulated, how many had been killed, how many were left, and it makes very grim reading. And it proves that really the 6 million figure is pretty much right. And Operation Reinhardt, Reinhardt was the key sort of the most intense phase of that murder. Anyway, so he's actually admitted it in later life. So it's kind of interesting because he did speak at the Institute of Historical Review and did come out with all this rubbish. And I'm sure he still feels very strongly that things like the bombing of Dresden were wrong, as do many people. Even, Tick History, I mentioned, he called it a war crime. I don't believe it was. I think in a war of national survival, you do what it takes to win. What is the most important thing is that you and your country survive. And anything that expedites that is what you do. But that's just my opinion. But anyhow, so getting on to John Depp and Amber Heard. So, yeah, I was pleased with the outcome because the psychologist who they had, they were married between, I think they got together about 2010 or something like that, on a film together, but they were married 2015, 2016, that period. And obviously things weren't going well. I mean, the fact was, obviously they were both, well, I say they were both. I know that Johnny Depp certainly was using drugs, alcohol, all this stuff. I'm sure he wasn't very pleasant to live with. I mean, he can't have been. He turned his wife lesbian. Sorry, that's an Eminem joke. I think he did, though. But that doesn't equate to abuse. The psychologist who was their marriage counsellor during that period said it was a mutually abusive relationship. And unfortunately for Amber Heard, the marriage counsellor had actually recorded some of their conversations where Amber had admitted to hitting Johnny Depp. And it got into this ridiculous discussion. Oh, well, I hit him, but I didn't punch him. Okay. Not sure that makes much of a difference. Imagine Johnny Depp had come out and said, I hit Amber Heard. Imagine the backlash on media. How would he be cancelled? But, she came out, I hit him. And yet she's the victim. Anyway, the counsellor said it was a mutually abusive relationship. They both shouted at one another, were rude to one another, all this stuff. But the problem is, in today's woke society, where everybody, as I say, the idea of masculinity has been castrated, a bunch of simps, most people are. Basically, I think I said this at the start, but this is the thing, that it's fine for a woman to defend herself and to stand up for her rights, and she can't be harassed and she can't be touched and she can't be bothered in any way. But if a man has the same principles, well, he's obviously abusive, he's a violent troll, he's a misogynist, And so, of course, Amber Heard is furious about the jury's decision. She says she'll appeal, and she claims, it's because of Johnny Depp's star power and all this stuff. Absolute rubbish. Amber Heard's really famous too. You know, she was in that, what was it, Wonder Woman? I can't remember now. No, Aquaman. She was the girl in Aquaman. And I liked her in that. She was good. Don't like her in real life, but she's good in that film. And yeah, so it's a victory for actually having to prove allegations, because it's very, very easy for you to say whatever you like. And the problem today is that we have culture, whereas whatever you say, if you're female, is automatically true. Whereas if you're a male and you claim anything, you'll be laughed out of the police station. Oh, my wife kicked me. My wife punched me. You'll be laughed out of there. You wouldn't even go in there because, it would make you feel like a eunuch going in. Oh, my wife punched me. My wife kicked me. She's abusive. But of course, if a woman goes in there, my husband, he's horrible. He's on drugs. He drinks. He's abusive. Well, they take that very seriously, won't they? So we're in a very twisted world. And so it's nice that there's a victory here for common sense and the fact that the person who admitted to actually attacking their husband and who has been proven to have chopped the end of Johnny Depp's finger off when she attacked him with a glass has actually been found to be in the wrong. And hopefully she has to pay the $10 million. Unfortunately, the $5 million in punitive damages in the state of Virginia, you can't actually inflict that much as punitive damages. It goes down to $350K. But you imagine what Johnny Depp has lost out on by these false allegations. He's missed out on so many parts. He said about Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, I guess that's big. But the big one for me is, and only because it affects me, I didn't really like Pirates of the Caribbean. It's not my sort of thing. But what's it called now? Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Because obviously Johnny Depp played the part of Grindelwald, who's like the chief villain in it. And he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant as Grindelwald. And, I went to the cinema and watched the latest episode with my daughter. And she's like, I don't like the new Grindelwald. And I agree. Mads Madsen is, a good actor. I mean, I know him from other films. It's not Johnny Depp. And we've got to know what Grindelwald looks like. And, it's disgraceful. And it's a sad indictment of this, disgusting world we live in, that these false allegations that were totally unproven, just something that Amber Heard had said in a newspaper libelously, messed up a film series, messed up Johnny Depp's career. But, for me personally, messed up a film series that I was really enjoying. Based on nothing, based on lies. And so I don't get to enjoy with my daughter a film series that we were loving. Totally messed it up. Take out the best character. Compare Jude Law with Johnny Depp. Come on, there's no comparison here. And it's very much the same with J.K. Rowling. We're seeing with the Queen's 70th Jubilee and this stuff that they removed J.K. Rowling or didn't include her in any of the sort of literary accolades. I don't know, readings of stuff or whatever. I don't really know what it is. I just saw that this has happened, that they're having some sort of literary commemoration. And our most successful living author by a mile, J.K. Rowling. I mean, our most successful dead author is obviously, Shakespeare, and then Agatha Christie, then Terry Pratchett, I think. But most successful living author from nearby where I live, in Chipping Sodbury, near Bristol, absolutely disgraceful, just because she stands up for women's rights. So it's a weird dichotomy, isn't it? That on one hand we're standing up for women's rights and cancelling people who allegedly are abusers when actually they're proven not to be ultimately in court. And yet when J.K. Rowling stands up for not having people that say they're men, that say they're women rather, when they're actually men, coming into women's toilets and using them in women's changing rooms, apparently that is that's taboo. So J.K. Rowling standing up for women's rights there gets cancelled. It's a sick world. And hey, I'll probably lose subscribers for this video if anyone bothers watching it, but I don't care. Thanks for listening.